I'm Cassie Cunningham from White River Valley Electric Cooperative in Branson, Missouri. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for this podcast comes from NRECA Broadband, a specialized service offering that helps electric co-ops succeed in the broadband business. We're leveling the playing field in Washington and positioning co-ops as a crucial force in rural broadband.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm Molly Christian, guest hosting for Scott Hoffman. In 2022, Congress gave co-ops direct access to energy innovation tax credits through an elective-pay option. Previously, such incentives were available to investor-owned utilities and third-party project developers with tax liabilities, but not to co-ops. The credits are now helping cut costs for co-ops to build innovative generation and energy storage projects and make their systems more resilient and modern. Today, I'll talk to Doug Browne, Chief Financial Officer for North Carolina's electric cooperatives, on how Elective-Pay is benefiting them and their members. First, I'll talk with Hill Thomas, Vice President of Legislative Affairs for NRECA, on how co-ops won access to Elective-Pay and why the credits are so important. Hill, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Elective-Pay is an important tool for co-ops. Tell us why NRECA pushed so hard for Congress to provide access to these credits.
Well, I think it's worth thinking about first, kind of at the highest 100,000 foot level. When I think about what we're advocating for, how we're prioritizing stuff, I think we're trying to build a toolbox of tools for our members to reach into whatever their unique opportunities and challenges might be to meet their future goals, needs, aspirations. And I just think of elective pay as one of those essential tools. So the reason why is tax policy really in today's government is one of the drivers of investment, one of the real public policy drivers of behavior. Think about your own personal life. There are tax incentives to buy a house, there are tax incentives to give to charities. Well, the same exist for energy policy as well. There are tax incentives to build new stuff, to deploy new technologies. And to the extent that our members want to and need to tap into those tax opportunities, those tax resources, again, to meet their unique future goals, elective pay is really the entry point into that tax toolbox.
And describe our advocacy efforts that helped lead to the passage of Elective-Pay in 2022.
Well, I'm sort of a recovering English major, so I can't help but think about, I think Ernest Hemingway was having some financial troubles and somebody was asking him how it happened. And it said, well, it started gradually, and then it was all at once. And so I think something like elective pay, something like parity for access to these tax incentives has been in the NRECA resolutions book for years, if not decades. But the stars had never aligned for us over the years. And maybe it's worth thinking about how there are these cycles where every 5 or 6 or 7 years, the Ways and Means Committee in the House, the Tax Writing Committee in the House, the Finance Committee in the Senate will have a big tax writing sort of bonanza, right? It might be driven by some sort of emergency or some sort of disaster or by some expiring tax credits, but it'll create an opportunity for a whole lot of tax policy to be written. Well, as these cycles sort of came and went over the years, we never, again, found the right policy, the right politics, the right procedure to get in there. So in early 2021, we're sort of looking at on the horizon and we're coming out of COVID and there's some expiring little tax pieces that are starting to mount up. And so we're sitting around here in Arlington thinking one of these tax bonanzas seems to be coming into shape. And so we knew we had enough of an instinct about what was going to happen that in 2021 at legislative conference, we talked about elective pay. You might remember. So over the course of 21, there were fits and starts. I think late 21, early 22, you might remember the Build Back Better bill. Elective pay was included in Build Back Better. It never came to fruition. We kept laying the groundwork. We kept telling our story. And I just will never forget, my birthday is the end of July. This is 2022. And I always think of it personally as like the kind of unofficial kickoff for me of the August recess. Of course, in August, all members of Congress go home for a district work period. It's a time for us in DC to do some long-term planning, to work on some projects that we've set aside. I'm driving home on a Friday afternoon. It takes me about an hour to get from the office to home. And during that hour when I'm in the car, I get home and I've got 100 messages, 100 text messages and emails from the GR team, because what had happened is that the legislation that became known as the Inflation Reduction Act had been introduced, and it had elective pay in it, and it had New Era in it. It had a bunch of other stuff that we cared about and we really liked. And then within 2 weeks, it had become law. I think it passed the Senate on a Sunday. It passed the House very quickly thereafter. So it felt like after years and years and years of trying and years of laying groundwork and sort of building in earnest over 21 and 22, it felt like we were almost sort of an overnight sensation.
Yeah, an overnight sensation. And as you pointed out, these are incentives that investor-owned utilities and other tax-paying entities, they'd had access to these credits in some form. So in some ways, it's very revolutionary, but it also just levels the playing field and makes things more equitable in that way. Wouldn't you agree?
It is a matter of fairness, I think. And again, the government, the Congress has set these tools out there for electric utilities to use. It feels unfair for us not to have access to those as we plan for our future.
And NRECA recently held its 2025 legislative conference, which brought together around 2,000 co op leaders to engage with Congress and agencies. What was our message for co ops on elective pay there?
I think it's worth thinking about what was our message to co ops and also what was our message to Capitol Hill. Our advice and our suggestion to our membership at the legislative conference was go up to Capitol Hill and tell a big story. Talk about the challenges and opportunities you face. Everybody in that room probably has a little bit of a different community pressure, circumstance back at home. Again, opportunities and challenges might differ for everybody, but we're all trying to answer that same fundamental question. How am I planning for the future? How am I going to deal with what looks like a whole lot of growth coming in the future from data centers and industrial growth and residential growth? So that's the challenge we're all facing. So, number one, go to Congress and tell a big story about those challenges and opportunities you're trying to overcome and to take advantage of. Two, public policy really does affect that mission. And then three, sort of what I started with was what are those tools that we need in our toolbox in order to succeed? So that was sort of how we talked to our members and what we encouraged our members to do when they went to Capitol Hill. I think the underlying implication for Capitol Hill is look at the big picture here. You, policymaker, we hope will take a sort of a holistic approach, a holistic pro-energy approach to policymaking as you look to the future. So elective pay is a huge part of that, but so is permitting reform, and so is getting rid of bad EPA rules, and so is defending New Era and GRIP and FEMA and the Snake River dams and helping make it easier to deal with wildfires. The best way to defend any one of these pieces is to tell a big story about how they all come together to help us do our job to take care of rural communities.
So, like you said, an important tool in the toolbox, and yeah, unlocking investment that's needed to make the grid more resilient, more reliable, and just to kind of modernize co op assets. Why is it important to protect access to these credits, and what is NRECA doing right now on that front?
Well, it's a little bit of a situation where today is the first day of the rest of our lives. You look out on the horizon, and one of those tax bonanza extravaganzas that we took advantage of back in 2021 and 22 is out there on the horizon. The tax writing apparatus in the Congress is getting ginned up for another one of those exercises. And so while elective pay doesn't expire, and so we don't have that acute pressure, we're going to have to be in maintenance mode on elective pay in the same way that you've seen us be in maintenance mode on our U.S. electric loan program, as an example, over the years and years and years. In the same way that we, again, took advantage of that last tax perfect storm back in 2021 and 22 to constitute elective pay, we're going to need to take advantage of the tax exercise that is starting to happen now in Congress. We're going to need to take advantage of that to defend elective pay and to maintain it. And so I think that's why, we talked about elective pay in 2021. It paid dividends at Ledge Conference. I think last week, us being up here to talk about elective pay was very good timing for this exercise too.
Some more to come, and yeah, a great message for co ops on how important these credits are and what we're doing as an organization to keep them in the mix. Hill, thanks for joining us and thanks for your insights. Great things to think about going ahead. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Let's pause here for a word from our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll learn how co ops in North Carolina are leveraging elective pay to lower costs for new battery storage projects and existing nuclear generation.
This podcast is supported by NRECA Broadband, a specialized service offering that helps electric co-ops succeed in the broadband business. NRECA Broadband has regulatory and legislative staff dedicated to representing co-ops' broadband interests through direct advocacy. The program also offers robust education and networking opportunities, as well as resources to help participants navigate this complex industry. Visit cooperative.com/broadband to learn how together we can help shape the future of rural connectivity.
I'm Clarice Kessler from the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives in Mandan, North Dakota. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Next, we'll hear from Doug Browne, Chief Financial Officer for North Carolina's Electric Cooperatives. Doug will talk about the value of Elective-Pay to NCEMC's portfolio and how the credits are leveling the playing field between co-ops and other utilities.
Hi, Doug. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning, Molly. Thank you so much for having me.
Investor-owned utilities have had access to these energy tax credits for a long time now. How does co-ops having access to Elective-Pay level the playing field and help co-ops unlock important investments in their systems?
Sure, Molly. That's a great way to start. For a long time, as you said, these credits have been available to the investor-owned taxable entities, which helps them reduce the cost of these very important projects. And so for electric co-ops, it's certainly very important that we're able to access those same benefits. Since our primary mission is to provide affordable, reliable power, we certainly want to take advantage where we can.
And tell us how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are using Elective-Pay tax credits. What projects and even existing facilities are getting support from these incentives?
We started in 2023 with some battery energy storage projects, and we constructed 40 megawatts of storage projects across 10 North Carolina electric cooperatives. And we have successfully applied for and received the money from the IRS using the Elective-Pay provisions. We received that money in 2024 after we filed our tax return.
And even some existing facilities, including one of the nuclear plants you co-own, I believe is qualifying for some of these credits. Can you talk about that?
Sure thing. Yes, we're very excited about the opportunity to monetize nuclear production tax credits, or NPTCs. That provision started with the 2024 operating year, so we will be applying for our first NPTC when we file our tax return here in just a few weeks. We're very excited. That's a very valuable tax credit, and certainly as a co-op to be able to monetize that and realize the value of the significant investment we put into nuclear, we're super excited about that.
And what is the benefit of Elective-Pay for your member consumers? Why are these incentives so important, and how do they affect the overall cost of the projects or the investments?
Yeah, so as a tax-exempt, not-for-profit electric cooperative, the direct savings on these projects flow down directly to the member consumers in rural North Carolina. By lowering the cost of the projects, we're able to keep rates at an affordable level and ensure that those benefits are flowing to the rural communities across the state.
And can you say for the storage projects, for example, how much of those costs are offset or what the percentage of the tax credit is?
Sure. So roughly, at least in the case of our projects, roughly 90% of the project was eligible for ITC. And then you get, 30 to 40% depending on where the projects are located. So roughly 25% of the total project we're able to recoup through the investment tax credits. On the nuclear PTC side, it's about 10 or 15% of our annual operating costs for our nuclear plant. So again, those are significant numbers that really benefit our rural communities.
Talk a little bit about the advantages for consumers from these storage projects. Talk about the resilience benefits, reliability benefits, how it could help maybe keep rates down. I mean, these credits are helping support these projects. So talk about why these projects and the credits kind of helping fund them are so valuable.
First of all, as the projects are being constructed, it certainly helps bring some income to those areas for the workers that are required to construct the project. So that's certainly a benefit to the area. And of course, the tax basis will help the counties from a non-specific utility perspective. But yeah, as you stated, from a resiliency, reliability standpoint, battery storage is certainly a new critical component that's going to help us. We're in a state where we can see ice storms, we can see hurricanes. So certainly having some battery storage to help in those situations is critical. And then, of course, on the demand response side, it's certainly a valuable resource when we're trying to manage the high costs that come when we have big swings in weather changes. North Carolina has become a winter peaking state. We have very, very large temperature variations in the winter months. And so, again, batteries help us give us a little bit of stability. And if you're able to apply the tax credits, it certainly lowers the costs and makes them very competitive with traditional peaking resources.
And I know you mentioned that you have started to get some of these payments or credits. Can you describe that process? I know the IRS just completed its rulemaking on the incentives, I think in 2024. Can you walk through how that process went, whether it was relatively easy or just kind of describe how you obtained them?
It was actually a pretty easy process. The first thing you have to do is once the project goes into service, you need to register with the IRS. So register the project. There's a handful of questions. So you need to know specific site location, size, all of that stuff. For those listening that are interested, they have an other information section where they want you to put in any narrative information that you might want to provide. I would recommend putting something in there. We did get a question back because we put a basic statement in there and they did ask us to add to that statement. So make sure you put in a pretty robust discussion in that other information section. But once that happened, it only took a couple weeks for us to get the actual registration number. And then it's just a matter of working with your tax folks, whether it's internal or your external tax preparers, to provide the necessary tax forms. Now, I will say the interesting thing that happened, they do ask for your bank account information. So you're expecting electronic payment. After a couple months, we had not seen anything. We weren't concerned. I mean, we figured it would take a while. And then one day, somebody in another department walked into the finance group and said, "Hey, this looks like it might be important. Not really sure, but I thought I'd bring it to you." It was in a very nondescript envelope, and we opened it up, and it was our check for roughly $11 million. So they actually sent us a paper check instead of depositing the money. So be on the lookout for that. I don't think we missed the step where we had to check electronic payment because we certainly provided the information, but I found that to be interesting. So overall, it was super easy. Just make sure you give them enough information, and I think they'll be happy with that. Same thing happened with our nuclear PTC. We put some information in. They asked for additional information. They asked for operating license, that kind of thing. And so we provided that, and within 2 days, we had our project number from them.
Sounds relatively straightforward. And again, obviously a huge benefit to you and your consumer members. And who doesn't love getting a big check in the mail? Anything else you want to highlight about the value of the incentives, kind of the need for them to make it easier for co-ops to affordably invest in more reliable, portable power?
The credits are meant to benefit our industry. And if the electric co-ops aren't able to take advantage, you're leaving out arguably the people that need it the most. And so it's very, very important that we continue to be able to access credits that other entities like us would be able to use, because it goes straight to the communities. We don't keep profits here. They all go back to the communities. Again, the jobs that some of these projects have created have been great. The tax basis in those counties, all of that is super important to continue to grow the rural communities across North Carolina.
Great. I think you've really highlighted why this is a great program for NRECA and its members. Thank you so much for joining us today, Doug.
I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and our sponsor, NRECA Broadband. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us at electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Molly Christian.
I'm Jennifer Erickson from Minn-Kota Power Cooperative in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.